My son was marrying a billionaire's daughter in Texas when he stopped me at the gate and looked at my old delivery truck. "Dad, please leave," he said. "You're just a delivery driver." I stood there holding the wedding gift I had spent weeks making for him. So I turned around and walked back to my truck. 3 minutes later, a convoy of black Cadillacs rushed through the gates. A man in a suit stepped out and said, "Sir, the billionaire has been searching for you for 15 years. I am deeply grateful you chose to be here with me today." Before we begin, drop a comment and let me know which country or city are you watching from. I'd love to know where this story finds you. Please note, this story carries fictional elements woven in for reflection and entertainment. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but every message here is meant for you. I have been driving trucks for 41 years. I have hauled grain through Nebraska, blizzards, furniture through Florida, hurricanes and medical supplies through roads that barely deserved the name. I have never once been ashamed of what I do. But on the morning of November 15th, 2025, my son looked me in the eye and told me I was an embarrassment to everything he had ever built. And then he handed me an envelope of cash and told me to disappear. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I did not drive 600 miles to cause trouble. I drove 600 miles because he is my son. That is the only reason a father ever needs. The Hayes estate sits on the edge of Houston like something out of a magazine that people like me only see in waiting rooms. White columns, iron gates tall enough to make a man feel small just standing next to them. When I turned onto the access road at 8:30 that morning, there were already dozens of vehicles lining both sides. Black SUVs, luxury sedans, a stretch limousine that probably cost more than my truck had earned in a full decade of roots. I eased my truck along the service lane near the hedgerow, cut the engine, and sat for a moment looking at myself in the rearview mirror. Navy blue vest pressed the night before with the iron Margaret left behind. White shirt collar buttoned all the way up. My hair combed back, my hands as clean as 41 years of diesel and road grime would allow. I looked like what I was, a working man, dressed in his Sunday best. I told myself that was enough. The wooden box sat on the passenger seat, wrapped in brown paper tied with a piece of twine from the back of the cab. 3 weeks I had spent putting it together, not with money, because I did not have much of that, but with care. The kind that takes time and means something. I picked it up, stepped down from the cab, and walked toward the main gate. The security guard held up one hand before I even reached him. Young man, broad-shouldered, clipboard in hand. "Sir, your name and invitation." "Harold Bennett," I said. "I'm the groom's father." He ran his finger down the list. Once. Then again. His expression didn't change. "I'm not seeing you here, sir. There may have been a mix-up," I said, keeping my voice easy. "Could you call inside Ethan Bennett? He's the groom." The guard reached for his radio. I stood and waited, holding the box, watching wedding guests drift past me in gowns and tailored suits like a river that didn't know I was standing in it. Nobody looked at me directly. Nobody looked away either. That was when I heard the footsteps. Fast. Deliberate. The kind that means someone wants to cover ground quickly without looking like they're running. I turned, and there was my son, Ethan Bennett, 35 years old. Black suit, custom fitted, every seam exactly where it was supposed to be. Silver tie. Hair styled with precision that requires professional help. He was by every visible measure the success he had always intended to become. And when his eyes landed on my truck, parked along the hedgerow, faded red, a long crack through the passenger side mirror, his face went the color of old ash. He reached me in seconds, grabbed my arm firmly, not roughly the way you grab something you need to move before anyone sees it, and pulled me around the corner of the gatehouse out of sight. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low and tight like a wire pulled just before it snaps. "How did you even find this place?" "I looked it up," I said simply. Something moved across his face, panic wearing frustration's clothes. He looked past my shoulder, scanning the driveway, checking who might be watching. His eyes dropped to the wooden box. "What is that?" "A gift," I said, "for you and Victoria." He let out a short breath through his nose. Not a laugh. Something harder. "You drove 600 miles to bring me something wrapped in twine." "Brown paper," I said. "I didn't have gift wrap, Dad." He said the word like it cost him money. "Look around you. Do you see where we are? Do you understand what today is?" "It's your wedding day," I said. "That's why I came." "You weren't invited." His jaw tightened like a clamp. There was a reason for that. My chest started to ache. Not sharp, just a slow, spreading pressure, the kind that comes when you lift something heavier than you planned. I thought maybe there was a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. He cut me off clean. He glanced sideways. A security guard and two guests in evening wear had paused about 15 feet away, pretending to look at a phone. His voice dropped further, but the edge in it sharpened like a blade being drawn slowly across stone. "Look at yourself. You drove a truck here. You're wearing a suit from a thrift store. You smell like a rest stop off I-10. He held my gaze without blinking. "In my file, my father has been dead for years. I am a self-made man, an orphan who built something from nothing. That is who I am to these people, to Richard Hayes, to Victoria, to every person inside that building." A pause that felt like a door slamming. "You showing up here makes me nothing but a cheap liar." I opened my mouth, then I closed it. There are moments when words simply won't come, not because a man has nothing to say, but because what needs saying is so large that language cannot carry it. My throat burned. My eyes stung in a way I refused to give in to. I stood there holding a box wrapped in brown paper and twine, wearing a dead friend's suit. And I let every word land on me the way you let rain land, because there is nothing else to do. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and produced an envelope, thick, cream-colored, the kind that holds real money. He pushed it into my breast pocket with 2 fingers, the way you tip someone you're certain you'll never see again. "Take this and leave," he said. "Consider it a final payment. Consider yourself gone." He turned and walked. And then at the gate he half turned, not enough to look me in the eye, just enough for his voice to carry loud enough for the security guard and the 2 guests nearby to catch every syllable. The day I left for college was the happiest day of my life. Not because of the scholarship. A beat. Because I finally had a reason to never come back. Then he walked through the gate and disappeared into the music and light of his wedding day. I stood where he'd left me. The 2 guests looked briefly in my direction, then away. The security guard studied his clipboard. A string quartet had started playing inside something bright and triumphant, floating over the iron gate like it belonged to a completely different world, which I suppose it did. I reached into my breast pocket, took out the envelope without opening it, and set it on the stone ledge of the gatehouse wall. Carefully. Then I turned and walked back to my truck. I climbed into the cab. I set the wooden box on the passenger seat. I pressed both hands flat on the steering wheel and stared through the windshield at the ivy-covered wall of the Hayes estate. My chest ached. My eyes burned. I breathed in slowly and breathed out slower. Inside that box was something I had carried for 15 years without understanding what it meant. And somewhere beyond that wall, though I could not have known it then, someone had been searching for that box, and for me, for every one of those 15 years. I walked back to my truck slowly. There was no rush anymore. I sat in the cab for a long time before I started the engine, and while I sat there, I found myself thinking about how it all began, not just this morning, but all of it. 41 years of all of it. I picked up my first route in the spring of 1984. 28 years old, the factory where I had worked for 6 years closed its doors on a Thursday, with 2 weeks' notice and a form letter from a corporate office in another state. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the cab of a freightliner that smelled like someone else's coffee and old cigarettes, listening to a dispatcher explain a route from San Antonio to Amarillo like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. For him it was. I gripped that steering wheel with both hands and thought, this is not what I planned. But then I started driving. And something happened on that highway that I did not expect. The road made sense to me in a way the factory never had. The miles were honest. You drove them and they stayed driven. The cargo was real. There was no ambiguity, no politics, no form letters, just the engine and the work and the long, straight truth of the road ahead. Margaret said it first, the way she said most true things simply without decoration. About 6 months in, she watched me eat dinner at the kitchen table with my work boots still on and said, "You look better when you come home from a long run." "I look tired," I said. "That's what I mean." She smiled over the rim of her coffee cup, those dark eyes of hers doing more work than her words. "Tired and like yourself. Some people never get to be both at the same time." Lord, she could make me laugh. Margaret had a laugh that filled a room from corner to corner, and a mind that found the exact right thing to say at the exact right moment. She was a better person than I was, and she knew it, and she never once held it over me. That is a rare and precious thing in a human being. Ethan was born 2 years into my driving career. 7 pounds 4 ounces, the loudest voice I had ever heard on something that small. I held him in the delivery room, still in my work clothes, because the call came in during a run, and he grabbed my finger with his whole fist and squeezed like he was already testing whether I was solid enough to hold on to. I decided right then that I would be. I remember him at 7 years old, climbing up into the cab on a Saturday morning, sitting in the passenger seat, with his sneakers dangling 4 inches off the floor, both hands on the dashboard, like he was bracing for takeoff. "Can I steer?" he asked, eyes wide and bright, practically vibrating with excitement. "Not today." "Can I honk the horn?" "Once, at the gate when we leave." He honked it 4 times, grinning so wide his face could barely contain it. I did not correct him. That grin, pure, uncomplicated, electric, was worth every second of the embarrassment. He grew fast. By 10, he was asking me to explain road signs and weight limits and how the dispatch system worked. He had a mind that wanted to understand the mechanics of everything. I explained what I knew and was honest about what I did not. That honesty I believed then and still believe is worth more than any answer. Then Margaret got sick. Ethan was 12. She was 41. Pancreatic cancer, the kind the doctor explained, was fast and unforgiving. 8 months from diagnosis to the end. 8 months is not enough time. No amount of time is, but 8 months is especially cruel. Ethan stood beside me at the funeral in a suit he had outgrown by an inch on each side. His jaw was locked so tight I could see the muscle working in his cheek. He didn't cry during the service. He cried later alone in his room, and I sat outside his door on the hallway floor because I did not know what to say, and I could not bear for him to be entirely alone with it. "Dad!" His voice came through the door, roughened and small. "Right here, son." A long silence. The kind that has weight to it. "Are you going to be okay?" My throat closed so fast it startled me. This 12-year-old boy, red-eyed, broken-hearted, asking if I was going to be okay. I pressed my back against the wall and stared at the water stain on the hallway ceiling I had been meaning to fix for 2 years. "Yeah," I said, and my voice only cracked a little. "We both are. It's going to take a while, but we are. Promise, promise." He opened the door, eventually. We sat together on his bedroom floor, with our backs against the bed, and talked about nothing important for a long time. That was enough. That was all there was. You hold the line for your kid, because the line is all that's keeping both of you from going under. The years after were leaner, but not broken. I drove. Ethan went to school. I made his lunches and checked his homework and showed up to every parent-teacher conference in my work clothes because there was no other option. If any of his teachers judged me for it, they were gracious enough to keep it to themselves. He was brilliant. Math, then economics, then finance. By high school, he was reading books about markets and investments that I couldn't follow past the third page. I didn't need to follow them. I just needed to keep the lights on while he read them. The letter from UT Austin arrived on a Tuesday in March. Full scholarship, tuition, room board, everything. I stood in the kitchen on Maplewood Drive and read it 4 times while Ethan watched me from the doorway. My hands trembled just slightly, just enough that the paper shook. "Dad." His voice was careful. "Is it good news?" I couldn't speak for a moment. I pressed the letter flat against my chest and looked at my son, 17 years old, tall now, with Margaret's eyes and a future that stretched far beyond anything either of us could see from that small kitchen. "It's the best news I've ever read," I managed. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and hugged me hard, the way he used to when he was very small, and I held on with both arms and let myself shake for just a second where he couldn't see my face. The morning he left for Austin, I drove him to the bus station in the truck. He had 1 duffel bag, a backpack, and the laptop I had paid for in 12 monthly installments. We stood on the sidewalk while other passengers filed past, and I told him everything. Fathers say call when you arrive, eat enough, sleep enough, ask for help when you need it. He nodded at each thing like he was memorizing a route. Then he picked up his bag, threw the backpack over one shoulder, and turned to face me. His eyes were bright, not wet, not yet, but close. "I'm going to make you proud, Dad," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. "I promise." "I know you will," I said. "You already have." He got on the bus. I watched it pull out. I drove home alone in the truck, the passenger seat empty for the first time in years. Years passed after that bus station, more than I could count by the end, though the distance between each one grew longer as they went. And somewhere between that sidewalk in San Antonio and the iron gate of the Hayes estate this morning, something changed in my son that I had not seen coming. The last time I saw him before today, he had asked me for something. And what happened that night is the reason everything else happened the way it did. 3 years before the wedding, Ethan called me out of nowhere. It was the first time in 8 months I had heard his actual voice, not a text, not an email, his voice. He asked me to come to Dallas. He said it was important. I drove 6 hours without stopping. The whole way up I-35, I kept the radio off and the windows cracked. 6 hours of road noise and my own thoughts. I told myself not to build it up too much. Ethan called when he needed something, and that was all right. That was what sons did. That was what fathers were for. His building was the kind that makes you feel underdressed just standing in the lobby. Marble floors, a front desk staffed by a young woman who smiled at me with the practiced warmth of someone trained to be welcoming to everyone equally, regardless of what they were wearing. I told her I was there to see Ethan Bennett. She called upstairs. A minute later, she nodded and pointed me toward the elevators. The penthouse. Of course it was the penthouse. When Ethan opened the door, my first thought was that he looked terrible. Not in the way that people look when they are sick, in the way they look when they have been carrying something too heavy for too long and are starting to feel it in their bones. Dark circles under both eyes. A tightness around his jaw that wasn't there the last time I had seen him. He was holding a glass of whiskey at 9:30 in the evening, and by the color of it, it wasn't his first. "Dad," he said, "you made it." 6 hours, I said. "You said it was important." "It is." He stepped back and let me in. The apartment was stunning, in the way that showrooms are stunning. Everything exactly placed, everything expensive. Nothing that looked like it had ever been touched by actual daily life. No dishes in the sink. No jacket thrown over a chair. No photographs on the wall. Not one. Not a single image of anyone anywhere in that apartment. I noticed it immediately and it settled in my chest like something cold. I sat on the leather sofa and immediately worried about my hands. 41 years of steering wheels and loading docks had left their mark, and the leather looked like it cost more than my monthly route pay. I folded my hands in my lap. "Can I get you anything?" Ethan asked, moving toward the kitchen. "Water, coffee." "Water's fine," I said. "Ethan, what's going on? You look like you haven't slept in a week." He set a glass of water in front of me and dropped into the armchair across from the sofa, with the easy collapse of someone whose legs had been threatening to give out for hours. He took a long pull of whiskey, stared at the glass afterward. "I've got a situation," he said. "A financial situation. Temporary. But I need some help moving a few things around on paper." "What kind of things?" "Administrative stuff, mostly." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, turning the glass slowly in both hands. "There are some documents I need a signature on. Liability transfers, some beneficiary adjustments. Standard restructuring language. My attorney drafted them." I looked at him carefully. "Ethan, I never went to college. I drive a truck. You're going to have to explain this to me like I'm 12 years old." Something flickered across his face, not quite irritation, not quite guilt. He reached for a folder on the coffee table and opened it. Inside were several pages each with small yellow sticky arrows pointing to signature lines. "It's simpler than it sounds," he said, and his voice had shifted into the mode I recognized from the few times we'd spoken about his work. Smooth, assured, the voice of someone who had learned to make complicated things sound inevitable. "Basically, for some of my investment structures to remain stable, I need to update the paperwork showing who holds certain interests. You're listed on some older documents from years ago, back when I was setting things up and used your name as a placeholder." "My name?" My eyebrows went up. "When did you use my name for anything?" "Years ago," he said, waving a hand like he was shooing a fly. "Before I had the proper corporate structure in place. It's just cleanup. Sign here, here, and here." He pointed to 3 yellow arrows on the first page. I took the pages from him and looked at them. The language was dense, the kind of legal prose designed, I have always suspected, not to explain things, but to prevent them from being understood. I read slowly, the way I read everything, moving my lips slightly. Ethan watched me. I could feel him watching. On the second page, partway down, a phrase caught my eye. "Declaration of sole surviving heir." I stared at it for a moment, trying to understand the context. Sole surviving heir. That meant the other person, me, presumably was being listed as not surviving. "Ethan," I said slowly, tapping the phrase. "What does this part mean?" He leaned over without getting up, glanced at it, and sat back. "That's just the legal way of establishing the chain of succession for the assets. Standard language. It says I'm a surviving heir." "You are," he said. "In the old structure. This updates it." I looked at him. He looked back at me steadily, and I thought briefly, like a shadow crossing a wall, that the steadiness was too studied, that it was the look of someone who had practiced looking relaxed. But this was my son. This was the boy I had raised, and he was sitting there in his too expensive apartment, with exhausted eyes and a whiskey glass he couldn't seem to put down, and he needed my help. I signed where the arrows pointed, all but the last page, which slid off the stack when Ethan shifted the folder and disappeared somewhere between the sofa cushion and the edge of the coffee table. Neither of us noticed at the time. "Thank you, Dad," Ethan said, and for just a moment, just a breath of a moment, he sounded like himself, like the kid on the bus to Austin. "This really helps." "You want to tell me what's actually going on?" I asked. "Everything's fine," he said. "Just restructuring." I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had felt in months. Ethan had called. Ethan had needed me. That was enough. That was more than enough. I was halfway to the elevator when I stopped. Something made me turn, some old instinct from years of making sure I hadn't left the cab unlocked or the freight unsecured, and I glanced back through the gap where the apartment door hadn't quite latched behind me. Ethan was on his phone, standing in the center of that beautiful, empty apartment, all the exhaustion gone from his posture, his voice sharp and clear, and carrying just enough through the gap for me to hear 3 sentences. "It's done. The paperwork is signed. We're clear." My hand rested on the elevator button. I stood there for 1 full second, maybe 2. Then I pressed the button and stepped inside when the doors opened. I told myself I had heard wrong. I told myself Ethan was simply relieved that a business problem was solved. I drove home that night and I slept fine. But there was one thing I forgot to mention. I had not signed all the pages that evening. One had slipped beneath the sofa cushion when Ethan passed me the folder. I found it the next morning folded inside my jacket pocket, where it must have gotten caught. I unfolded it, looked at it, dense legal language, a signature line at the bottom, my name printed in clean type above it, and I folded it back up and put it in the old wooden box I kept under the seat of my truck. Later I would learn that the pages I had signed that evening were legally sufficient on their own to accomplish what Ethan needed. The missing page was simply the final confirmation, and without my signature on it, he had eventually forged the rest through a secondary filing I knew nothing about. I did not think much of it at the time. I should have. 2.5 years passed after that night in Dallas. Ethan and I spoke less and less. A text on my birthday, a Christmas call that lasted 4 minutes and ended with him saying he had a meeting. I told myself this was normal. Successful men were busy men. I had read that somewhere, and I chose to believe it because the alternative was harder to sit with. Then one morning last June, I pulled into Denny's off Route 10 outside San Antonio, same booth I had been sitting in every Tuesday morning for 11 years. Same waitress named Carol, who always brought my coffee before I ordered it, and I looked up at the television above the counter and saw my son's face. He was standing on a stage somewhere that looked like it cost more per square foot than most people's homes. Next to him stood a young woman in a cream-colored dress, dark hair, the kind of composed and effortless beauty that photographers spend entire careers trying to capture. And to his right hand, extended, gripping Ethan's in a firm shake, stood a man I recognized immediately, Richard Hayes, oil money, Texas royalty, the kind of name you saw on buildings. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Ethan Bennett and Victoria Hayes announce engagement." Carol appeared at my elbow with the coffee pot. She looked at the screen, then at me, then at the screen again. "You know him?" she asked. My throat felt thick. My eyes were stinging in that way that sneaks up on you when you are not prepared for something. "That's my boy," I said. Carol set the coffee pot down on the table, something she had never done in 11 years, and stared at the screen with her hand over her mouth. "Lord have mercy," she breathed. "Harold, that's your son." "That's my son," I said again. Saying it twice made it more real and somehow less real at the same time. I called him the moment I got back to the truck. 4 rings, then voicemail. His professional voicemail, the one that said, "You've reached Ethan Bennett. Please leave a message and I'll return your call at my earliest convenience," in a voice so polished I barely recognized it as his. I left a message. I said congratulations. I said I was proud of him. I said, "Call me when you get a chance." 3 days later, a text arrived. "Thanks." 1 word. 1 period. Nothing else. I stared at that message for a long time, sitting in the cab outside a distribution center in New Braunfels. The engine was running. The AC was blowing. And I sat there reading a single word. Thanks from my son, sent 3 days after I had called to congratulate him on the biggest news of his life. And I felt something in my chest that I did not have a name for. Not quite hurt. Not quite anger. Something older and quieter than either of those. Something that had been building for years without me giving it permission. I put the phone in the cup holder and drove my route. The months that followed were strange in the way that ordinary things become strange when something large is happening just out of sight. I drove my routes. I gassed up the truck, ate at the same diners, checked into the same motels on my overnight runs. 3 times the route took me through Houston, past the gleaming towers downtown where I knew Ethan worked, past the streets, where the Hayes name appeared on buildings and parking structures and charitable foundation signage. Each time I thought about stopping. Each time I kept driving. He was building something. I did not want to be the thing that got in the way of it. Then 1 month before the wedding, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. "Mr. Bennett." Man's voice smooth and businesslike. "Harold Bennett." "Speaking," I said. "I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Ethan Bennett. He wanted me to let you know that the upcoming wedding is a private event, attendance by invitation only." A pause carefully timed. "You will not be receiving an invitation. He hopes you understand." My hand tightened around the phone. My knuckles ached. "Who is this?" I asked. The call ended. I sat in the cab of my truck on the shoulder of Route 90, the engine idling, the heat of a Texas October pressing through the windshield glass. 18-wheelers blew past me doing 75, and the whole cab shuddered with each one. I did not notice. I was looking at the highway and not seeing any of it. "You will not be receiving an invitation." He had sent someone else to make that call. He could not be bothered to do it himself. Or he could not face doing it himself. I was not sure which was worse. I called his number. Voicemail on the first ring, which meant he saw my name on the screen and declined it deliberately. The kind of thing a phone does when the person holding it makes a choice. I put the phone back in the cup holder and drove. I drove for 2 hours without stopping, not because I had anywhere to be, but because movement helps when the alternative is sitting still with something that hurts. That evening back home, I sat at the kitchen table where Margaret and I used to have coffee in the mornings, and I thought about what kind of man sends a proxy to deliver that kind of news to his own father. I thought about the apartment in Dallas, the leather sofa, the empty walls, the whiskey glass, the 3 sentences through a barely open door. Then I got up and I went to the truck and I pulled the old wooden box from beneath the seat. I set it on my kitchen table and opened the lid. Inside, the folded page from Dallas with its unsigned signature line. A piece of twine. 2 photographs, one of Margaret holding Ethan the day he came home from the hospital, one of Ethan at 7 years old in the cab of the truck, hands on the dashboard, grinning so wide his whole face was grin. I looked at those photographs for a long time. My eyes burned. My throat ached. I pressed the heel of my hand hard against my chest because the feeling there had gotten large enough that I needed to push back against it. Then I closed the box, went to the bedroom, and started ironing my navy blue vest. I pressed my palm flat on the lid of that wooden box for a long moment before I put it in the truck the next morning. There was something about it I had never been able to explain, a feeling that it mattered somehow, that I was supposed to keep it close, even though I did not know why. I started the engine. 600 miles. A wedding nobody wanted me at. I put the truck in drive and pulled out onto the road. What I did not know was that somewhere in Houston, someone had been searching for me for 15 years. And that morning, for reasons I still cannot fully explain, they were finally about to find me. I left before sunrise. The highway was empty at that hour, just the long-haul trucks and the occasional early commuter whose headlights appeared in my rearview mirror and then faded into the dark behind me. I had Margaret's thermos in the cup holder, the one she bought the Christmas before she got sick. Stainless steel, a little dent on the lid where I had dropped it in a parking lot in Abilene about 6 years back. I never replaced it. Some things you just don't replace. The coffee was strong, the way I liked it, and the road was straight. The way Texas roads tend to be long and flat and honest, stretching out ahead of the headlights, like a promise that kept renewing itself every mile. I had driven this stretch of I-10 more times than I could count. Every cracked overpass, every rest stop, every cluster of billboards advertising personal injury lawyers and outlet malls. I knew this road the way you know the face of someone you have looked at every day for years. But that morning it felt different. That morning every mile was taking me somewhere I had never quite been before. The radio came on automatically when I started the engine. A morning news program out of San Antonio. Anchors trading traffic reports and weather updates in the easy rhythm of people comfortable with each other. I listened for about 10 minutes. Then the woman anchor said, bright and cheerful as a greeting card, "And of course all eyes in Houston today for the wedding of the year. Ethan Bennett and Victoria Hayes tie the knot at the historic Hayes estate this afternoon. Our correspondent will be live on the scene starting at noon." I reached over and turned the dial until I found static. Then I turned the radio off entirely. My son's wedding, being covered by a news crew. And I was the man who had to find out about his own son's engagement from a television in a diner. I pressed my foot a little harder on the accelerator. Not much, just enough. The miles went by the way miles do when your mind is somewhere else quickly and without landmarks. I thought about what I would say when I got there. I had rehearsed it enough times over the past month that the words had started to feel worn smooth, like a coin that has been handled too many times. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to see you on your day. I'm proud of you, son. That's all I came to say. Simple, clean, true. I thought about Ethan at 17 standing on the sidewalk at the bus station with his duffel bag over one shoulder, telling me he was going to make me proud. I thought about the way his voice had cracked on that last word, just slightly. Just enough to remind me that underneath all that determination was still the kid who cried outside his bedroom door after his mother's funeral. My eyes went hot. I blinked hard twice, fixed my gaze on the road, and breathed through it. Get it together, Harold, I told myself. You're 69 years old. You do not cry on the highway. I stopped for gas outside of Columbus about halfway and used the restroom at the station. Splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the cracked mirror above the sink. Navy blue vest. White shirt. The tie Margaret had given me for our 20th anniversary, the one I had worn exactly 4 times in my life, because it felt too good for ordinary days. I had decided the night before that this was not an ordinary day. I looked old in that mirror, older than I felt usually. My hair had gone fully white sometime around 63, and I had stopped noticing it, but the fluorescent light in that gas station bathroom was not kind, and I could see every year of I-10 and I-35 and Route 77 in my face. The lines around my eyes, the permanent furrow between my brows from 41 years of squinting through windshields into afternoon sun. I straightened my tie, smoothed the front of the vest with both palms. "You are his father," I told the man in the mirror. "That does not change because he forgot it for a while." Back in the truck, I picked up the wooden box from the passenger seat and held it for a moment. 3 weeks of putting it together. Inside were things I had collected over years, photographs, a letter I had written Ethan the night before he left for college and never sent because I could not figure out how to end it. A small folded piece of paper with a pressed wildflower that Margaret had tucked into my lunchbox once on a long-run day with a note that said, "Come home safe." I had kept it ever since. And underneath all of that, still folded precisely as I had left it, the page from Dallas. The one with the unsigned signature line and the dense legal language and the phrase, "Declaration of sole surviving heir," printed in the middle of the second paragraph. I had not thought about that page in 2 years. Looking at the box now, I thought about it. I set the box down, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway. 30 miles outside Houston, the city began announcing itself the way big cities do, the skyline appearing first as a suggestion on the horizon, then solidifying into glass and steel as the miles closed. The traffic thickened. The lanes narrowed psychologically, even when they didn't physically. I merged, signaled, stayed in the right lane the way I always did in city driving. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. A text from a number I didn't recognize. I picked it up at a red light and read it. Mr. Bennett, we strongly advise you not to proceed to the Hayes estate today. This is a courtesy reminder. A courtesy reminder from a number I had never seen. Sent at 7:43 in the morning, which meant someone had been up early thinking about me. My jaw tightened. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. A hot, quiet anger moved through my chest, not the explosive kind, the slow-burning kind that sits low and does not make noise and does not go away. I set the phone back on the seat face down and drove the last 30 miles without looking at it again. I found the access road to the Hayes estate at 8:25. The line of vehicles along both sides told me the event was already well underway with arrivals. Black SUVs, town cars, a caterer's van, a florist's truck unloading the last of something white and elaborate through a side gate, and me in a faded red truck with a cracked passenger mirror and a wooden box on the seat beside me. I pulled along the hedgerow, cut the engine, and picked up Margaret's thermos. One last sip of coffee gone cold now, but still tasting like something worth holding on to. I set it back in the cup holder, picked up the box, and opened the truck door. The morning air smelled like cut grass and expensive flowers and something faintly sweet that I couldn't name. Music drifted over the iron gate, something classical, refined. Nothing like the radio stations I listened to on long runs. I straightened my tie one more time, took a breath that went all the way down, and I walked toward the gate. This is where I come back to where I started, because everything I have told you. The factory closing the first route. Margaret, the bus station, the penthouse in Dallas. The text I never answered, and the call that ended before I could ask who was speaking all of it. Every mile of every road led to the moment I stepped out of that truck and walked toward the gate with a wooden box under my arm and a feeling in my stomach that I told myself was just nerves. I have already told you what happened at the gate, but I have not told you all of it. I have not told you what it felt like from the inside. The security guard was polite. He was doing his job. I do not hold anything against that young man. He looked at his clipboard, didn't find my name, and reached for his radio. That is exactly what he was supposed to do. He looked at me with the careful neutrality of someone trained to be professional, regardless of what they are thinking, and I appreciated it. It was while he was on the radio that Ethan appeared. I heard him before I saw him. Those fast, deliberate footsteps on the stone pathway. The sound of someone trying to move quickly without looking urgent. Then he came around the corner of the gatehouse, and his eyes found mine and found my truck in the same half second, and I watched his face do something I had never seen it do before. It collapsed. That is the only word for it. Every careful, constructed thing about his expression, the confident set of his jaw, the ease he had clearly practiced until it felt natural, all of it just fell away for one unguarded moment before he pulled it back together. In that single second, I saw something raw and frightened underneath all that tailored confidence, and it broke my heart more than anything, he said afterward, because it told me that some part of him was still in there. The boy who cried on the hallway floor. He was still in there somewhere, buried under all that ambition and all that shame. Then the mask came back up, and he grabbed my arm and pulled me around the corner of the gatehouse. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low and coiled tight like a spring under pressure. "How did you find this place?" "I looked it up," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I looked up my son's wedding venue. That is not a complicated thing, Ethan." "You got a text," he said, jaw working. "You were told not to come." "I got a text from a number I didn't know," I said, asking me not to attend my own son's wedding. I decided that was not a message I was going to follow. Something moved behind his eyes. Frustration, yes, but also something that looked uncomfortably close to panic. He glanced over my shoulder, scanning the driveway, checking faces. 2 guests in evening wear had slowed near the gatehouse. A security guard was watching from a discreet distance. His voice dropped to something that was barely above a whisper, but had the force of something much louder. Do you have any idea what kind of people are inside that building right now? CEOs, senators, oil executives, people whose names are on airports. His eyes dropped to my vest, my tie, the wooden box in my hands, and something in his expression curdled. And you drove a truck here. You're wearing a thrift store suit. You smell like a rest stop off I-10, Dad. My chest tightened so hard, it took my breath for a moment. My eyes burned. I held the wooden box with both hands and made myself stand straight. I ironed this suit last night, I said quietly. I wore this tie to your mother's funeral. I drove 600 miles to see my son get married. Your son, Ethan said. And something in his voice went completely flat, not angry, not contemptuous, just cold, the way metal goes cold when there is no warmth left near it, does not exist in your definition anymore. Every document in my professional life lists my father as deceased. Richard Hayes believes I built everything alone, an orphan who made himself from nothing. That is the foundation everything here is built on. His voice dropped to something flat and final. You standing at that gate tears the foundation out. The words hit me like something physical. My throat closed. My eyes went hot and wet in a way I refused to give into, refused completely because I was 69 years old and I had buried my wife and driven through blizzards, and I was not going to stand in front of a gatehouse and cry. But Lord, it hurt. It hurt in a way I cannot fully put into language because the hurt was not just about what he was saying to me. It was about what it meant that he could say it. That he had thought it through. That he had decided at some point deliberately and with calculation that the kindest thing I could do for him was to not exist. Ethan, I said, and my voice was rougher than I intended. I am your father. I have been your father since before you could hold your own head up. That does not. Take this. He pulled an envelope from inside his jacket, thick, cream-colored, and pushed it into my breast pocket with 2 fingers. The gesture was so practiced, so mechanical, that it felt worse than the words, like I was a transaction being closed out. Take it and leave. Consider it a final payment. Consider yourself gone from this, from all of this. My hands shook just slightly, just for a moment, a fine tremor that I controlled before it became visible. I reached into my breast pocket, took the envelope out, and set it carefully on the stone ledge of the gatehouse wall. I don't want your money, I said. His eyes went to the envelope, then back to me. Something twitched in his jaw. Then walk away anyway, he said. Walk away because I am asking you to. Walk away because every second you stand here is a second I am losing everything I spent 15 years building. Ethan, every year I looked at you growing up, he said. And now his voice had taken on a rhythm, like he had rehearsed this, like he had needed to say it for a long time and was finally saying it. I saw the ceiling. The absolute limit of what I was allowed to become if I stayed connected to you. So I removed the ceiling. I removed you. Something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. The way good wood cracks under too much weight, cleanly along the grain all the way through. He turned toward the gate. He was already walking. And then half-turned, not looking at me loud enough for the security guard and the 2 nearby guests to hear every word. And then, before he walked through the gate, he said the thing I have turned over in my mind every day since. I heard it then. I am hearing it now in this truck as clearly as I heard it the first time. The day I left for college was the happiest day of my life. Not because of the scholarship, because I finally had a reason to never come back. He walked through the gate. The music swelled from somewhere inside, something bright and triumphant that floated over the iron like it belonged to a completely different world. I stood where he had left me. The two guests looked briefly in my direction and then studied their phones with great intensity. The security guard found something fascinating on his clipboard. The morning went on around me the way mornings do, indifferent, unhurried, full of other people's business. I walked back to my truck. My legs felt strange, not weak exactly, but disconnected, like they were working without full instructions. I climbed into the cab, set the wooden box on the passenger seat, and put both hands on the steering wheel. My chest ached in that deep structural way that has nothing to do with the heart muscle and everything to do with what the heart carries. I breathed in, I breathed out, and then my phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at it for 2 rings. 3. On the 4th, something instinct habit, the same reflex that makes you pull over when you see someone in trouble, made me pick it up. "Mr. Bennett," a woman's voice. Professional, precise, with the unhurried confidence of someone who delivers important information for a living. "Harold James Bennett, formerly of San Antonio." "Speaking," I said. "My name is Claire Donovan. I'm executive assistant to Mr. Richard Hayes." A brief pause. "Mr. Hayes would like to meet with you immediately. He says it's a matter of considerable importance." Another pause, shorter. "He also asked me to tell you something specific. He said, and I'm quoting directly, that he has been looking for you for 15 years. I almost did not answer. Unknown numbers, on a morning like that one, could only mean more bad news, another proxy calling on behalf of my son to deliver another message I did not want to hear. But something made me pick up. The same instinct that makes you slow down when you see brake lights a quarter mile ahead, even before you know why. You just do it. You trust the feeling. "Speaking," I said. "My name is Claire Donovan. I'm executive assistant to Mr. Richard Hayes." Her voice was calm and precise, the voice of someone paid to deliver important information without letting her own reaction color it. "Mr. Hayes would like to meet with you immediately. He says it's a matter of considerable importance." I looked through the windshield at the iron gate of the Hayes estate. The morning sun was catching the top of it, making the metal gleam like something ceremonial. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "I think there may be a mistake. I'm a truck driver from San Antonio. I don't have any business with Richard Hayes." "Mr. Hayes anticipated you might say that," Claire Donovan said without missing a beat. "He asked me to tell you something specific. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, that he has been looking for you for 15 years. My hand tightened around the phone so fast my knuckles ached. 15 years. The number landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples it made went deep and immediate and unsettling. 15 years, I repeated. My voice came out strange, rougher than I intended, scraped at the edges. "Ma'am, what exactly does Mr. Hayes want with me? I'm not able to share the details over the phone," she said. "But Mr. Hayes also asked me to mention, and again I'm quoting, that you should bring everything you have with you, particularly anything you may have received or collected around November of 2010. The wooden box sat on the passenger seat beside me. I stared at it. November 2010. Something shifted in the back of my mind, a dark road rain so heavy the wipers couldn't keep pace with it. The smell of something burning, a voice I had not thought about in years. "Mr. Bennett?" Claire Donovan's voice came back through the phone. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," I said. "Tell Mr. Hayes I'll be there. A convoy will arrive at your location in approximately 8 minutes. Please stay where you are." The call ended. I set the phone down and pressed both palms flat on the steering wheel, breathing the way Margaret taught me when something got too big to process all at once, slow in, slower out, until the body remembers it knows how to function. My heart was hammering in a way it had not hammered in years. Not from fear, from something that I did not yet have a name for, but that felt terrifyingly like the first edge of understanding. November 2010. The box, a road in the rain. I reached over and put one hand on the lid of the wooden box, not opening it, just resting my palm on the worn surface the way you rest your hand on the shoulder of someone sitting beside you, when words are not enough. I had carried this box for 15 years through blizzards and heat waves and 3 engine replacements, and one accident on I-20 that took out my rear axle and left me stranded for 6 hours. I had never once considered leaving it behind. "Why do you even keep that thing?" a dispatcher named Roy had asked me once years ago, seeing it under the seat during a cargo check. "It's just an old box." I know I had said, "I keep it anyway." I had not been able to explain it better than that. Some things you carry, not because you understand them, but because something in you knows they matter. You trust the weight of them. Exactly 8 minutes after the call ended, 3 black Cadillac Escalades turned onto the access road and rolled to a stop in front of my truck with the quiet authority of vehicles that are accustomed to making things happen. The doors opened. Men in dark suits stepped out, 4 of them all, with the alert stillness of people trained to notice everything and react to nothing. The one who approached my window was perhaps 50 silver at the temples, with the kind of face that had stopped being readable sometime around age 30 and had stayed that way. I rolled the window down. "Mr. Bennett," he said. Not a question, a confirmation. "Mr. Hayes is waiting. We'll take you in through the east entrance. My truck will be here when you return." He said it with such complete certainty that I believed him without understanding why. I grabbed the canvas bag from behind the seat, put the wooden box inside it, and stepped down from the cab. The morning air hit me still cool, carrying the scent of cut grass and those elaborate white flowers I still could not name. The Escalade's rear door was already open and waiting. I looked at my truck, one more time, faded red, cracked mirror, 41 years of honest work, written into every dent and scratch, and then I got into the Cadillac. The convoy moved. The estate wall slid past the tinted window. And somewhere beyond that wall, something that had been in motion for 15 years was finally about to arrive. As the convoy moved through the east gate and wound along the private road toward the main building, I closed my eyes and let myself go back. Back to November. Back to the rain. I had been running a route down to Corpus Christi that week, a 2-day haul medical equipment. Nothing that couldn't wait. But nothing that should wait longer than necessary either. Ethan was home from UT Austin for the fall break, 20 years old, restless the way young men are restless when they are full of ideas and have not yet found enough room for all of them. He had asked to ride along. 6 hours each way in a truck cab, I had said. "You sure it's not exactly exciting? I've got nowhere else to be," he said, already reaching for his jacket. "And you make good coffee." We talked. The whole way down. Really talked the way we had not managed in a while between his semesters and my routes, and the geography that had opened up between us since he left for Austin. He told me about his economics courses, about a professor who had told him he had the sharpest financial mind she had taught in 20 years. His eyes lit up when he talked about it. He looked like himself. He looked like the kid who honked the horn 4 times and grinned wide enough to split his face. I was proud enough to burst. I did not say it out loud, because I could never figure out how to say that kind of thing without it coming out smaller than it felt. But I was. The drive back started fine. We left Corpus Christi at 8 in the evening, heading north on Route 77. By 9, the weather had turned. By 9:30, the rain was coming down so hard that the wipers were useless. I was driving on memory and the white lines and 41 years of knowing how roads behave in bad weather. Ethan had gone quiet beside me, watching the rain hammer the windshield with the fascinated unease of someone who had not yet logged enough miles to be comfortable in this kind of weather. "How do you see anything?" he asked. "Slowly," I said, and carefully. That was when the headlights caught it. A dark SUV off the right shoulder on its side, in the shallow drainage ditch that ran alongside the road. The front end crumpled. One headlight, still burning, pointed sideways into the rain like a flare signal. Steam or smoke rising from somewhere under the hood. In that rain, it was hard to tell which. I braked, immediately felt the truck shimmy slightly before the tires caught and eased onto the shoulder. "Dad," Ethan's voice went tight. "What are you doing?" "There's someone in that car," I said, already reaching for the door handle. The rain roared against the cab roof like applause. "Call 911 and keep driving," Ethan said, and his voice had a sharp, urgent quality that I had not heard in it before. "It is not our problem. There could be fuel leaking, it could blow." "Stay in the truck," I said. "Call 911. Give them our mile marker." I pushed the door open into the rain. It hit me like a wall, cold and immediate and absolute. I was soaked through by the time I reached the SUV, maybe 15 steps from my truck. I crouched down at the passenger side window, now facing upward because the vehicle was on its side, and looked in. One man. Older, I put him at late 60s, maybe 70. White hair matted with blood above his left ear. Shoulder at a wrong angle, the kind of wrong that means broken. His eyes were open, blinking against the rain that was now coming in through the shattered window. And when he saw my face, he grabbed for my arm with his right hand and held on with surprising force. "Can you move?" I asked him loud over the rain. "My shoulder," he said, and his voice was tight with pain. "I can't, the door." "Don't try to move yet. Help is coming." I got both hands under the window frame and pulled until something gave. The door was warped but not locked, and with enough force it swung open and upward. "Okay, I'm going to help you out. Tell me if anything gets worse." It took several minutes to get him free. He was heavy, and the angle was terrible, and the rain made everything slick, but he worked with me as best he could, using his good arm and his legs, and eventually he was out and sitting on the wet ground, with his back against the wheel well of my truck, while I knelt in the mud beside him. I took off my jacket and put it over his shoulders. "Can you breathe okay?" I asked. "Yes." He was panting, pain and cold and shock all doing their work. "Yes, I can breathe." "Then just breathe. Keep breathing. The ambulance is coming." He looked at me with eyes that were sharp and dark and fully present despite everything happening to his body. "What's your name?" he asked. "Harold," I said. "Harold Bennett." He held my gaze for a moment. Then something moved across his face that I did not know how to read, recognition maybe, or the beginning of it. "I won't forget that name," he said. The ambulance arrived 18 minutes later. I told the paramedics what I knew, gave the officer my name and number, and walked back to my truck. Ethan was gone. The passenger seat was empty, the door closed, no note. His phone went straight to voicemail when I called. He texted 2 hours later. "Caught a cab. Didn't want to deal with police questions. Sorry." I drove home in the rain alone, with the heater running and the radio off. In the morning, cleaning out the cab, I found a leather wallet on the floor beneath the passenger seat, slim, dark brown, monogrammed with initials I couldn't make out in the poor light. Inside, no cash but a business card and a sealed envelope. I put them in the wooden box. I told myself I would find a way to return them. Life continued. I forgot. But the box did not forget. The box never forgets anything. The room they brought me to was nothing like what I expected. No marble floors. No oil paintings the size of walls. No crystal chandelier throwing expensive light across expensive furniture. Just a working man's office, real oak desk stacks of actual paper with handwritten notes in the margins. A window that looked out over a kitchen garden rather than a city skyline. The kind of room that tells you the person who uses it actually works in it rather than poses in it. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in. The man behind the desk was already standing when I entered. Not because he heard me coming, but because he had been standing. Waiting the way people stand when they have been anticipating something for a long time and cannot make themselves sit still anymore. Richard Hayes was 72 years old and looked every year of it in the way that men who have actually lived their years look weathered and solid with the posture of someone who had never learned to slouch because there had never been time for it. Silver hair thick and well kept, a face that had been handsome once and had traded that handsomeness for something more durable authority depth, the particular gravity of a man who had made serious decisions and lived with their consequences. He looked at me the way you look at something you have been searching for, not with the casual appraisal of a first meeting, but with the sharp, total focus of recognition. "Harold Bennett," he said. Not a question. A confirmation spoken with a quiet intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. "That's me," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. My heart was doing something complicated in my chest, not quite hammering, not quite calm. Something in between, like an engine running at higher RPM than usual. He crossed the room toward me, not slowly, not with the measured dignity I might have expected from a man of his position, but directly, purposefully, the way you move toward something you have waited too long to reach. He extended his hand, and when I shook it, he covered our handshake with his left hand as well, both of his around one of mine, and held it for a moment longer than a standard greeting requires. His hands were not the hands of a man who had only ever signed papers. There was callus there. There was history in the skin. "I have been looking for you for 15 years, he said. My throat tightened. "Your assistant mentioned that. I have to be honest with you, Mr. Hayes, I'm not sure I understand why." He released my hand and gestured toward the chairs arranged near the window. Two of them facing each other at a slight angle with a low table between them. No desk between us. That told me something about how he intended this conversation to go. We sat. He poured water from a pitcher on the table, just water, no ceremony, and pushed a glass toward me. Then he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at me with those dark, precise eyes. "November of 2010, he said. Route 77, outside Corpus Christi, a bad storm. The air went out of the room, or that is how it felt. Everything seemed to narrow and sharpen at the same time: the window, the garden outside it, the sound of the string quartet somewhere distant in the estate, all of it pulling back until there was only this room and this man and those three words. A bad storm. My chest ached with a sudden and overwhelming force. My eyes went hot. I pressed my lips together and breathed through my nose and worked very hard to hold myself together. "You were in that car," I said. My voice came out rough, scraped, raw at the edges. "I was in that car," Richard Hayes said. And something in his own voice shifted when he said it. Something cracked open, slightly, controlled, but real, the way a man sounds when he allows himself to remember something he usually keeps behind a closed door. My driver lost control in the rain. I was unconscious when we went off the road. When I came to, the vehicle was on its side and filling with water from the drainage ditch, and I could not move my right shoulder, and I thought... He stopped, cleared his throat, started again. I thought that was where it ended for me. My hands were trembling just slightly, just enough that I pressed them flat on my thighs to steady them. 69 years old, and this man's words were making my hands shake like I was nervous about something I hadn't been nervous about in decades. Then a man appeared at the window. Richard continued, his voice settling back into its natural register, measured but warm underneath. He broke the door open. He pulled me out. He put his jacket over me in the rain, his own jacket, while he was standing there soaking through, and he crouched in the mud next to me and talked to me for 20 minutes until the ambulance arrived. He held my gaze steadily. He never asked my name. He never asked what I did or who I was. He just asked if I could breathe, and he told me to keep breathing. A tear escaped. Just one from my right eye before I could catch it. I pressed the back of my hand against my cheek, fast and hard, embarrassed in a way that surprised me. "I'm sorry," I said, rough-voiced. "I'm not usually—" "Don't," Richard said firmly, but not unkindly. Don't apologize for that. I pulled in a long breath. Let it out slow. I didn't know who you were, I said. I want you to know that. I didn't recognize you. I just saw a man who needed help. Richard Hayes smiled, then a real smile, not the practiced public one I had seen on television. This one came from somewhere deeper and showed in the corners of his eyes as much as in his mouth. I know, he said. That is precisely why I have spent 15 years trying to find you. How did you? I gave the paramedics your name when they arrived. They logged it. My people found the report 18 months later. A brief shadow crossed his face. But Harold Bennett is not an uncommon name, and you move around. Comes with the job, I said. He laughed, a short, genuine sound that filled the room with unexpected warmth. Yes, it does. He leaned back slightly. We traced 6 Harold Bennetts in Texas alone, 2 in neighboring states. It took years to narrow it down, and then he paused. Then there were complications in the search. Interference we later discovered. But that is a conversation for shortly. Something cold moved through my chest at the word interference. I did not ask about it. Not yet. Something told me the explanation was already on its way and that I needed to be sitting down when it arrived. I lost my wallet in the accident, Richard said. I lost something in that wallet that was irreplaceable. Something I had been carrying because I did not yet know where to keep it safely. I reached down to the canvas bag at my feet. My hands were still not entirely steady as I lifted the wooden box out and set it on the low table between us. Richard Hayes looked at the box and went very still. You kept it, he said softly. Not surprised, something past surprise, something closer to awe. I kept everything, I said. It wasn't mine to throw away. I opened the lid. The leather wallet sat on top, dark brown, worn at the corners now, but intact. Beneath it, the sealed envelope yellowed slightly at the edges, but otherwise exactly as it had been the morning I found it on the floor of my cab. Richard picked up the envelope with both hands. He held it the way you hold something fragile, not because it might break, but because it deserves that kind of care. His jaw tightened. His eyes went bright with something he was visibly working to contain. You never opened it, he said. No, sir, I said. It wasn't addressed to me. Richard Hayes set the envelope down on the table and covered it with one hand. He breathed in deeply through his nose. When he looked up at me, his eyes were wet, genuinely unguardedly wet. The eyes of a man who had just watched something he had stopped believing in walk through a door. Harold, he said, do you know what is in here? No, I said honestly. Neither do my lawyers. Neither do my enemies. He pressed his palm flat on the envelope. And that is the only reason I am still standing. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope, and trust me, it changes everything, drop a 10 in the comments right now, so I know you're still here with me. Because what Richard Hayes had been holding on to for 15 years is not what anyone expected. And a gentle note. The story ahead carries some fictional threads woven in for meaning and depth. If that's not your kind of journey, it's completely fine to step away, no hard feelings at all. Richard Hayes did not open the envelope right away. He set it on the desk between us and poured 2 more glasses of water. Just water, no whiskey, no ceremony, and he told me to sit closer. Then he looked at the envelope for a long moment, the way a man looks at a door he has been trying to reach for a very long time now that he is finally standing in front of it. 15 years ago. He began, his voice low and even. Hayes Energy was the target of a coordinated fraud scheme. Not from outside the company, from inside. I shifted in my chair. Inside, I repeated. A senior vice president, a man I had trusted for 11 years, had been feeding proprietary contract information to a competing firm. Caldwell Energy. You wouldn't know the name, but in this industry, they are significant. His jaw tightened. When I discovered what was happening, I began quietly gathering documentation. Bank transfers, internal communications, a contract between my VP and Caldwell's CEO that made the arrangement explicit. He tapped the envelope with one finger. Everything I had collected was in here. The original documents, the only copies in existence. My mouth had gone dry. And you were carrying them in your wallet. In a sealed envelope inside my wallet, yes. He looked at me steadily. I was taking them to my private attorney that night. A man I trusted completely outside the company. I did not want to send them electronically. I did not know who had access to my servers. Physical delivery was the only option I was certain was secure. And then the accident, I said. And then the accident. He leaned back. When I woke up in the hospital, the wallet was gone. The envelope was gone. I assumed Caldwell's people had gotten to the vehicle before my security team did, that they had been watching me, that they had taken the documents, that I was finished. Something hardened in his expression, not anger exactly, but the residue of 5 years of fighting without the weapon he needed. The lawsuit that followed nearly destroyed this company. 5 years of litigation from 2011 to 2016. Hundreds of millions in settlements and legal fees. My VP walked away with a reduced sentence because we could not prove the full scope of what he had done. I was gripping the arms of the chair without realizing it. My knuckles had gone white. Because you didn't have the envelope, I said. Because I didn't have the envelope. He looked at the sealed packet on the desk between us and shook his head slowly, not in defeat, but in the particular disbelief of a man processing the distance between what happened and what could have happened. And all this time it was in a wooden box under the seat of a truck in San Antonio. I'm sorry, I said, and my voice came out thick. I didn't know. I should have tried harder to find you. I should have... Harold. Richard's voice was firm and warm at the same time, the voice of a man stopping someone from flogging themselves for something they do not deserve to be flogged for. You pulled me out of a wrecked vehicle in a rainstorm. You kept my property safe for 15 years without touching it. You drove 600 miles this morning to see your son get married when you had every reason to stay home. He looked at me directly, without any of the professional distance that men in his position usually maintain. Do not apologize to me. My eyes burned. I pressed my lips together hard and looked out the window at the kitchen garden, rows of something green and orderly in the November sunlight, until I had myself back under control. What happens now? I asked. With the envelope, Richard picked it up and opened it carefully, sliding the contents out onto the desk. Several pages, some typed, some handwritten, one that appeared to be a photocopy of a bank statement, with numbers highlighted in yellow. He spread them out slowly, reverently, the way an archaeologist handles something that has survived longer than anyone expected. Now, Hughes said, my attorneys spend the next 60 days reviewing these documents. If they are what I believe they are, and I have no reason to think they are not, we reopen the fraud case. Under Texas law, the statute of limitations was legally suspended because Caldwell's people actively concealed the existence of this evidence. The clock never started running. Our attorneys argued that position for years without the proof to back it. Now we have the proof. He looked up. We're talking about damages north of $200 million, Harold. The number meant almost nothing to me. In any practical sense, it was simply too large to hold. But the weight of it was real. The weight of what had been sitting under the seat of my truck for 15 years, unexamined, undisturbed, kept safe by nothing more than the habit of a man who believed that things which don't belong to you should not be tampered with. 200 million, I said slowly. Approximately. Richard began carefully returning the pages to the envelope. Which brings me to something else. Something I need to tell you, and I need you to be prepared for it, because it concerns your son. The warmth drained out of the room, or out of me, I am not sure which. My chest went tight in a new way, a worse way. Ethan, I said, Ethan knew I was in that vehicle that night, Richard said, and he said it gently, but without softening it, the way doctors deliver difficult news clearly, because clarity is the only true kindness available. He was with you. He saw the accident, and he chose to leave before the ambulance arrived. My hands fell open in my lap. The trembling came back worse this time, moving up through my forearms. I pressed my palms flat on my thighs and stared at the desk between us. How do you know that? My voice barely made it out. Because my security team reviewed traffic camera footage from that stretch of road during the investigation. We identified your truck. We identified 2 occupants. And we identified that one occupant left on foot approximately 12 minutes after your truck stopped. Richard's voice was careful, measured, giving me the information without editorializing it. At the time, we did not know who that person was. When we eventually identified you, Harold Bennett, truck driver, San Antonio, we identified that you had a son. And when Ethan became engaged to Victoria, I recognized the last name. The clock on Richard's wall ticked. Somewhere outside, the string quartet played something slow and graceful that floated through the window like it was completely indifferent to everything happening in this room. Ethan had been in the truck with me. Ethan had seen that SUV go off the road. Ethan had watched me get out in the rain and had told me to keep driving. And when I had not listened, when I had done what I always did, which was stop for people who needed stopping, for Ethan had gotten out of the truck and walked away into the dark before the police arrived. For 15 years, he had known who Richard Hayes was. He had known that the man in that car was connected to the name he would one day attach himself to. And he had never said a word. Harold, Richard's voice came to me from somewhere that felt far away. Are you all right? No, I said honestly, but I will be. Richard nodded slowly. He reached across the desk and placed his hand briefly on my forearm, just for a moment, just long enough to mean something. There is more, he said quietly, and I think it is time you heard all of it. Richard pressed a button on his desk phone and said 2 words, "Send Marcus." 3 minutes later, a side door opened and a man walked in. Perhaps 40 years old, broad-shouldered, with a face that had learned sometime around age 30 to show exactly as much as it intended to show, and nothing more. He wore a dark suit, no tie, and he moved with the unhurried economy of someone accustomed to operating in rooms where important things happened. He looked at me once, a quick, complete assessment, the kind that takes less than a second and misses nothing. Then looked at Richard and sat down in the 3rd chair without being asked. Marcus Webb, Richard said to me, has been part of my security team for 8 years. Until 6 months ago, he was also receiving monthly payments from your son. The words hit me like a fist to the sternum. My breath left me in one sharp, involuntary exhale. I gripped the arms of the chair and stared at Marcus Webb, who looked back at me with an expression that was not quite apologetic and not quite indifferent, somewhere in between, the expression of a man who has made a choice he is prepared to own. Mr. Bennett, Marcus said, his voice measured and direct. I want to be straight with you about what happened, because you deserve that. Go ahead, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended, scraped thin by everything the last hour had already cost me. 6 months before the wedding, Ethan approached me privately. He knew I was on the team responsible for tracking down the man who had helped Mr. Hayes in 2010. He knew we were getting close. Marcus leaned forward slightly. He offered me money to slow the search down, redirect certain leads, make sure Harold Bennett stayed unfound. Something hot and bitter rose in my throat. He paid you to hide me. He paid me to lose you, Marcus said. There's a difference, but not much of one. I took the money, $3,000 a month cash from an account registered to a shell company Ethan had set up. His jaw tightened slightly. I told myself it was temporary, that I would stop. I kept telling myself that for 4 months. What changed? Richard asked, not because he didn't know the answer I sensed, but because he wanted me to hear it directly. Marcus looked at me. The payments stopped. 2 months before the wedding, the account went dark. I reached out to Ethan through the channel he had given me. No response. Then last week, I ran the account through our financial verification system. A pause. It had been seized by a creditor. Ethan's personal finances were in freefall, had been for over a year. He was drowning in debt he had hidden behind corporate structures and borrowed names. My hands were trembling again. I pressed them flat on my thighs and breathed. Borrowed names, I said carefully. Marcus looked at Richard. Richard nodded, a small, deliberate gesture that meant tell him. 3 years ago, Marcus said, Ethan brought you to his apartment in Dallas and had you sign documents. You remember that? I remember, I said. My stomach had turned to cold concrete. Those documents were not administrative cleanup. They were a restructuring of beneficiary rights across 4 investment vehicles Ethan controlled or believed he controlled. By signing them, you unknowingly transferred your status from living dependent to deceased estate predecessor. Effectively, on paper, you died. Marcus said it without cruelty, but also without softening it. That gave Ethan legal grounds to restructure the debt liability across those vehicles in ways that would have been impossible while you were listed as living. The room tilted. Not literally, but something in my equilibrium shifted violently, and I had to grip the chair again and breathe through the wave of it. 69 years old, 41 years of roots, a suit ironed the night before, and in some filing cabinet in some office building in Dallas, I had been dead for 3 years. He killed me on paper, I said. The words felt absurd even as I said them. To cover his debts. To buy time, Marcus said. The marriage to Victoria was the endgame. Access to Hayes Capital would have cleared everything, the debts, the liability, all of it. The wedding was not a love story with a financial footnote. For Ethan, it was a financial strategy with a wedding attached. My chest was heaving, not from tears, from the effort of containing something much larger than tears. My jaw ached from clenching. I stared at a fixed point on the desk between us and forced myself to breathe, forced myself to stay in the chair, forced myself to stay present in this room where everything I thought I understood about my son was being dismantled piece by careful piece. There's one more thing, Marcus said, and his voice dropped slightly. About the night of the accident. I know about the night, I said tight-voiced. Richard told me Ethan was in the truck. He was. Marcus held my gaze steadily. But what you may not know is that Ethan saw the vehicle go off the road before you did. The camera footage shows your truck brake lights activating approximately 4 seconds after another vehicle, a sedan, had already passed the accident site at speed. That sedan matches the description of a car Ethan's college records show him renting that weekend. I stared at him. He was in a separate car. We believe he was following you. The rental record puts him on Route 77 that night. Marcus exhaled slowly. He saw the accident first. He drove past it. Then we believe he doubled back, abandoned the rental, and got into your truck, claiming he had been with you all along. When you stopped and went to help, he panicked and left on foot. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. My son had driven past a dying man, had turned around not to help but to cover his tracks, had sat beside me in that cab knowing what was in the ditch behind us, had watched me get out in the rain and said, "It's not our problem." "Marcus," Richard said quietly, "give us a minute." Marcus stood, nodded once at me with something in his eyes that I could not fully name, respect, maybe, or something adjacent to it, and left through the side door. Richard looked at me. I looked at the garden through the window. My eyes were burning so badly, I could barely see the rows of green out there blurring and reforming. "Harold," Richard said, "what do you need right now?" I thought about it. Genuinely thought about it the way you think when someone asks you a real question and expects a real answer. "I need a minute," I said, "and then I need to know the rest." Richard picked up his phone and sent a text. He did not use the intercom this time. He typed with both thumbs the way men his age type when they have learned the technology, but not made peace with it, and set the phone face down on the desk. "There is one more person you need to hear from," he said, "and I think her perspective will matter to you." 30 seconds later, the main door opened. The woman who walked in was still wearing her wedding dress. Ivory silk fitted at the waist, a short train that whispered against the floor as she moved. Dark hair pulled back precisely. She was 32 years old, and she carried herself with the particular composure of someone who had decided very early in life that she would not allow the world to see her off balance, not because she was never off balance, but because she had learned that showing it costs more than it buys. She looked at me the moment she entered the room, and she did not look away. She looked at me the way someone looks at a person they have been thinking about for a long time, with recognition and with something that I could only describe as relief. "Mr. Bennett," she said, and her voice was warmer than her composure suggested it would be. "I feel like I already know you." "Victoria," Richard said, "sit down and tell Harold what you told me." She sat. She smoothed the front of the dress with both hands, a small human gesture that cracked the composed surface just slightly, and looked at me steadily. "6 months before the wedding," she said, "I hired a private investigator to look into Ethan's background. My eyebrows went up before I could stop them. You investigated your own fiancé. I investigated the story he told me," she said, without apology and without defensiveness. Just the clean, direct honesty of someone who has thought this through thoroughly enough that she no longer needs to justify it. The story was that he was an orphan, self-made, no family, no ties. "I am my father's daughter, Mr. Bennett. I know what it looks like when someone is performing a version of themselves rather than being one." "What did the investigator find?" I asked. My voice was rough, but I kept it level. "He found you." Victoria's composure shifted just slightly, just around the eyes. "Harold James Bennett, San Antonio. Active CDL license, 41 years of commercial driving. Very much alive." She held my gaze. "He found the debt. He found the shell companies. He found the documents you signed in Dallas, and what they actually meant." A pause. "He found the accident on Route 77 and Ethan's presence there that night." I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth for a moment hard, because the alternative was something I was not willing to do in front of this woman I had just met. "And you still went through with the wedding," I said, when I trusted my voice again. "I went through with the mourning," she corrected me gently. "I had not yet decided about the wedding. I was waiting." "Waiting for what?" She looked at her hands folded in her lap, perfectly still, the hands of someone exerting enormous control over something that wanted to move. "I was waiting to see what Ethan would do when the truth arrived at the front gate." She looked back up at me. "You were the test, Mr. Bennett. You arriving today, I knew you were coming. My investigator told me you had left San Antonio before sunrise. I told my father this morning. We decided to let it play out." "You used me," I said. Not with anger, just making sure I understood correctly. "I gave you the chance to matter," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word, just enough to tell me that this was costing her something real. "There's a difference. I thought about that." Then I nodded slowly. "Fair enough," I said. Victoria reached into the small silk pouch at her wrist. I had not noticed it until now, and withdrew a folded piece of paper. Worn at the creases, slightly yellowed, the kind of paper that has been handled many times over many years. She placed it on the table between us. "The investigator observed your truck on several occasions," she said. "On one of those occasions, the glove compartment was open and the road atlas was visible through the window. He photographed what he could see from outside. This was in it, folded inside the atlas, just visible at the edge." I looked at the paper. My chest contracted so sharply it took my breath. It was the letter. The one I had written the night before Ethan left for Austin. 18 years ago. The one I had rewritten 4 times and still could not get right, and had finally folded up and put away because I did not know how to end it, and letters without endings should not be sent. "You read it," I said. "I read it," Victoria said. "I hope you'll forgive me for that." "What did it say?" Richard asked, and I realized he hadn't seen it. Victoria looked at her father. Her composed face did something complicated and brief. It said, among other things, that a father's job is not to give his son a perfect life. It is to give him an honest one. And that wherever Ethan went, whatever he became, his father would be proud of him for trying. She looked back at me, and her eyes were bright now in a way they had not been when she walked in. It was unsigned. He never sent it. "No," I said. "I could never figure out how to end it." Victoria pressed her lips together for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was careful and deliberate and entirely direct. "That letter, Mr. Bennett, is the reason I am still sitting in this building. And it is the reason that what happens next is going to happen the way it does." She reached into the silk pouch again. This time she produced a small photograph printed from a digital image slightly grainy. It showed the lobby of a tall office building. A man in a delivery uniform holding a hand truck stacked with boxes, holding a door open for a young woman who was struggling with an armload of files. The man was grinning. The woman was laughing. The man was me. Maybe 5 years ago, one of my Houston routes. 14 employees of Hayes Tower recognized you when our investigators showed them your photo, Victoria said. 14 people remembered a delivery driver named Harold, who helped them carry things, held doors, gave up his parking spot in the rain, learned their names. She set the photograph down beside the letter. Not one of them knew he was Ethan Bennett's father. Not one of them knew he delivered to that building 3 times a month for 6 years. Something broke loose in my chest. Something large and old and quietly devastating. My eyes filled before I could stop them, and this time I did not press my Hess against them. I let it happen, because those 14 people had never been asked to remember me. They had just remembered anyway. Victoria reached across the table and placed her hand over mine briefly, firmly, the way you anchor something that is in danger of drifting. "There's one more thing," she said. "Dale Cooper is here." Richard's expression shifted, a tightening around the eyes, controlled and immediate. "Who is Dale Cooper?" I asked. Richard buttoned his jacket and stood. "Walk with me, Harold," he said. "It's time you saw the rest of this." Richard Hayes did not explain who Dale Cooper was right away. He stood up, buttoned his jacket with the unhurried certainty of a man who had been dressing for battle his entire career, and said, "Walk with me, Harold." We went through a side corridor, narrow plain, the kind of passage that connects important rooms without being important itself, and emerged through a set of glass doors onto the edge of the reception area. The afternoon light hit me first, then the sound, then the scale of it. Tables draped in white linen stretched across a flagstone terrace the size of a small park, every one of them full. Crystal caught the November sun and threw small rainbows across the tablecloths. A string quartet played near the far railing, where Galveston Bay glittered blue and vast beyond the estate grounds. Hundreds of guests in evening clothes moved between tables. Lifted glasses leaned toward each other in the easy way of people who had known each other long enough to be comfortable. And there I was, navy blue vest, thrift store tie, a canvas bag over one shoulder with an empty wooden box inside it. I felt every eye in the vicinity find me within seconds of my stepping onto that terrace. Not because I was important, because I was wrong. Wrong clothes, wrong build, wrong everything for this particular room. The kind of wrong that makes people look twice and then pretend they didn't. Richard walked beside me without breaking stride, without adjusting his pace to accommodate my discomfort, without offering any reassurance. He simply walked, and because he walked beside me as though my presence here was the most natural thing in the world, people looked and then recalibrated and then looked away. "Dale Cooper." Richard set his voice low and level, built Caldwell Energy from a regional supplier into a national competitor over 20 years. During that time, he used every method available, legal and otherwise, to undermine Hayes Energy's market position. He was behind the fraud scheme that nearly destroyed my company 15 years ago. He is also, technically speaking, a guest at this wedding. I looked at him. How? Because 6 months ago, when Ethan was arranging the guest list, he invited Cooper, under the guise of a neutral industry, contact someone Ethan claimed could facilitate future business partnerships between Hayes Energy and Caldwell. Richard's voice stayed even, but something moved behind his eyes, controlled anger, old and well-managed. Ethan did not tell me who Cooper was. I only discovered the connection 2 weeks ago. By then, uninviting him would have created more disruption than allowing him to attend under controlled conditions. So he is here, I said, at your daughter's wedding, invited by your son-in-law. My potential son-in-law, Richard said. The day is not finished. He stopped walking. I stopped beside him. About 40 feet away, near the bar on the far side of the terrace, a man stood slightly apart from the crowd. Dale Cooper was perhaps 65, heavyset, with silver hair swept back from a broad forehead, a suit that was expensive without being showy, and the particular stillness of someone who is watching rather than participating. He held a glass of sparkling water, and he was looking directly at us. No, he was looking at me. More precisely, he was looking at my vest, my bag. The contrast between what I was and where I was standing. And he had his phone in his other hand, held casually at his side, angled in a way that a person who wasn't paying attention might not notice. I noticed. He's filming, I said. He intends to, Richard said. The plan, as best we have reconstructed it, was to capture footage of Richard Hayes's daughter marrying the son of a truck driver, footage that could be packaged as a story about Hayes Energy's leadership being compromised by family instability. The kind of story that moves stock prices and shakes investor confidence. He wanted footage of me, I said, not with anger, with the flat recognition of someone understanding a mechanism. He wanted footage of your son's reaction to you, Richard said, which, given what happened at the gate this morning, would have been sufficient. I looked at Cooper across the terrace. He looked back at me. He raised his glass slightly, a small, deliberate gesture, the greeting of a man who has already decided he has won something. A young server appeared at my elbow, carrying a tray of water glasses. She was moving quickly, navigating between tables, and the crowd had shifted slightly and narrowed her path. She was about to have to stop or push through. I stepped to the side and held the space open for her. "Thank you, sir," she said, surprised and genuine, and moved through. "You're welcome," I said. It lasted 4 seconds. It meant nothing. It was just what you do when someone needs room to pass. But I felt Cooper's attention shift, felt it, the way you feel a change in road conditions through the steering wheel before you consciously register it. I turned back toward him. His phone was no longer angled toward me. His expression had changed in a way that was small and total, the particular deflation of someone whose planned footage has just become unusable. There is no story in a man in a worn vest stepping aside for a server. There is no scandal in basic human decency. Whatever narrative Cooper had come here to construct required me to be embarrassed, reactive, out of place in a way that showed. And I was out of place, I knew that. But I was not embarrassed. I had never learned how to be embarrassed about being exactly what I was. Richard watched the exchange without turning his head. Then quietly, "Harold, yes, I would like to introduce you to some people." He raised his voice just enough to carry to the nearest tables, not dramatically, not with the performance of a man making an announcement, just with the natural authority of someone whose voice people had been listening to for 50 years. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Harold Bennett, a man who once saved my life and asked for nothing in return." The nearest tables went quiet. Then the quiet spread outward the way quiet does when something real enters a room full of pleasantries. Across the terrace I saw Ethan, He was standing near the far railing, with a champagne flute in his hand, and he had gone the color of old concrete the moment he saw me step onto the terrace. Victoria stood 3 feet to his left. She was not looking at me. She was looking at him, watching his face with the careful, total attention of someone waiting for an answer to a question she had been holding for a very long time. Ethan set his champagne flute down deliberately, the careful control of a man containing something far larger than a glass. Then he walked straight toward me with the stride of someone executing a decision before his nerve had time to reconsider. The crowd parted without knowing why. People simply sensed something purposeful moving through them and shifted aside. He stopped 3 feet in front of me. The string quartet continued near the railing. The afternoon went on, being an afternoon completely indifferent to the fact that everything between my son and me was about to be spoken out loud for the first time in 35 years. "You have no idea," Ethan said, his voice low and vibrating with something barely contained underneath, "what you have just walked into." I said, "I am starting to understand." His eyes dropped to the canvas bag on my shoulder. Something moved across his face, not quite recognition, not quite fear. The instinct of a man who has built an elaborate structure and has just heard a sound from inside the foundation. "Come with me," he said. "Not a request." He moved toward the corridor. I followed not because he told me to, but because I was not finished with this day. The glass door closed behind us. The music faded to a murmur. The corridor was cool and plain and quiet in the way that spaces between important rooms always are. Just the two of us. No audience. No one to perform for. Ethan turned to face me. And now that the crowd was gone, the control began to slip, small fractures appearing along lines that had been under pressure for too long. "How much does Richard know?" His voice was stripped of everything except urgency. "What did you tell him?" "I didn't tell him anything," I said. "He already knew. He has known for longer than you realize." Something flinched behind his eyes. "The documents are with his attorneys." I watched his jaw tighten until the muscle in his cheek jumped. The sealed envelope, the fraud evidence from 2010, everything in that wooden box all accounted for now. His chest heaved once, a sharp breath pulled in like a man surfacing from underwater. He pressed the back of his wrist against his mouth. His eyes went bright and desperate and hard all at once. "You don't understand what any of this cost me," he said, his voice cracking. "The debt, the years, the things I had to do just to stay in the room with people who started 10 steps ahead of me." "I understand debt," I said quietly. "I paid your college tuition in 12 monthly installments. I have been building from nothing my entire life." He made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, something that broke apart halfway between the two and came out raw and jagged. "That is not the same," he said, fierce and low. "Watching you get talked down to by every dispatcher who had a bad day. Watching you eat lunch in the cab because you couldn't afford the diner. I swore I would never be that. Never give anyone that kind of power over me. So you took that power from me instead," I said. The words landed. I watched them land. Denial rose first across his face, then collapsed, then something underneath honest, in the way only the things we never intend to admit are honest. "Every year I looked at you," he said, his voice finding the rhythm of something rehearsed inside his own mind for a long time, waiting for a room to say it in. "I saw the ceiling, the absolute limit of what I was allowed to become if I stayed connected to you. A route, a thermos, a parking space outside a loading dock." His voice cracked and he pushed straight through it. "I needed to be more than that. And the only way to get there was to cut the ceiling out entirely." "You cut me out," I said. "Not the ceiling, me." "Yes," he said, straight without flinching. "I did." My chest ached with a pain so old it barely registered anymore. Something closer to weather. Something you carry because there is no putting it down. "The night on Route 77, I said. You saw that vehicle go off the road before I did. The air in the corridor changed. His face cycled through 3 expressions in 2 seconds, denial appearing first, then dissolving, then the wreckage of a man who has been carrying a specific weight for 15 years and has just heard the person in front of him name it precisely. I panicked, he said. His voice had gone very quiet. I was 20 years old, and I panicked. You recognized the vehicle, I said. Not a question. His chin dropped slightly. I had seen that SUV 2 weeks before. A finance conference in Austin. Richard Hayes had arrived in that exact vehicle. I knew whose car it was. He forced himself to look back up at me. And I knew what it would mean if my name got attached to that scene. A college intern, a wrecked vehicle belonging to one of the most powerful men in Texas, a dark road, no clear explanation. A long pause. I thought about my internship, everything I had worked for. I chose my future over his life. I have known what that makes me every single day since. Why didn't you tell me? My voice came out rougher than intended, not with anger, with something older and heavier. Because telling you meant admitting it was something I could never take back, he said. And because he stopped, started again. Because you went back in the rain and you stayed with him. You gave him your jacket. You talked to him for 20 minutes to keep him conscious. His voice dropped until I could barely hear it. And I sat in that cab and watched you through the windshield, and I hated myself so completely that I got out and walked away. I could not sit there one more second, looking at who you were compared to who I was. The string quartet started a new piece beyond the glass door, something slow and aching drifting through the corridor like it had been chosen for this exact moment. I looked at my son, 35 years old. Expensive suit, red-rimmed eyes, shoulders curved inward under a weight he had been distributing in the wrong direction for so long that his whole posture bore the shape of it. Ethan, I said, I know about the paperwork I signed in Dallas. I know about Marcus Webb. I know about the shell companies that you restructured the beneficiary rights on your investment vehicles by removing me from the chain as a living dependent. On paper, you made it appear I had no claim. I kept my voice level, not cold, level. I know all of it. He opened his eyes, dry and devastated past tears in the territory where a man simply stands in the full light of what he has done and lets it be seen. Then you know there's nothing left, he said. There's always something left, I said. The question is what you decide to do with it. I turned toward the glass door. Behind it, the reception continued, music, voices, hundreds of people living their Saturday afternoon. Where are you going? His voice behind me, rough, stripped, younger than it had sounded at any point in the day. To do what needs to be done, I said, and I pushed through the door and walked back into the light. Richard was already moving when I came back through the glass door. He met me at the terrace edge and spoke quietly enough that only I could hear. Are you all right? No, I said, but I'm standing. He nodded once, the nod of a man who has survived enough hard days to recognize someone else in the middle of one. Then stand next to me, he said. There is something that needs to be said, and I want you beside me when I say it. He moved toward the small raised platform near the center of the terrace. A staff member handed him the microphone. The string quartet brought their piece to a gentle close. The quiet spread outward in rings, table by table, conversation by conversation, until 300 faces were turned toward the platform. Richard simply began speaking. No throat clearing, no tapping the microphone. Just his voice and the authority that had been in it for 50 years. My friends, I want to tell you a story. It will take a few minutes, and I ask for your patience because it is a story I have been waiting 15 years to tell. Someone set down a fork. The small sound carried. 15 years ago, I was in a serious automobile accident on a rural highway south of here. My driver lost control in a storm. I was trapped, injured, and alone, and I believed in those first minutes that I was not going to survive. The terrace was so quiet, I could hear the bay against the sea wall below. A truck driver stopped. He had no obligation to stop. He broke open the door of my wrecked vehicle, with his bare hands pulled me out, and sat with me in the mud for 20 minutes until the ambulance arrived. He gave me his jacket. He talked to me the entire time, just asking if I could breathe, telling me to keep breathing. Richard paused. When the paramedics arrived, he gave his name, answered their questions, and left. He did not ask who I was. He did not wait to find out what would happen next. A woman at the nearest table pressed her fingers to her lips. It took me 15 years to find him, partly because he does not stay in one place and partly because certain obstacles were placed in the way of that search. His jaw tightened on the last sentence. But I found him this morning. He is standing on this terrace right now. He extended one hand toward me. Harold Bennett, a truck driver from San Antonio, Texas, 69 years old, 41 years behind the wheel. The man who saved my life and never once asked for anything in return. 300 people turned to look at me. My face went hot. My eyes burned. I gripped the canvas bag strap with both hands because I needed something solid to hold on to. Someone began clapping somewhere in the middle of the crowd, and it spread fast, genuine, like something that had been waiting for a place to land. People stood, table by table, outward from the center until the entire terrace was on its feet. My throat closed completely. My eyes spilled over, and I pressed the back of my hand hard against them and told myself firmly that 69-year-old truck drivers from San Antonio do not fall apart in front of 300 people. Through the blur, I found Ethan. He had slipped back through the glass door during Richard's speech. He stood at the far edge of the crowd, alone despite being surrounded by hundreds of guests. Victoria stood 10 feet away, watching him with quiet, total attention. His face was doing something I had never seen in 35 years. It was breaking. Not sharply, quietly, the slow, irreversible give of something that had held under too much pressure for too long and had finally simply let go. The applause was still fading when I moved, not toward the platform, not toward the crowd pressing forward to shake Richard's hand. I moved toward Ethan. He saw me coming and flinched quickly, controlled, then straightened his spine with visible effort. He thought I was coming to confront him in front of 300 witnesses. I could see that calculation happening in real time behind his eyes. I walked past him. He turned, startled. I kept moving back through the glass door down the corridor to a narrow window overlooking the kitchen garden. I stopped there. After a moment, footsteps. Then his voice, uncertain in a way I hadn't heard since he was very young. "What are you doing?" "Giving you a moment out of the crowd," I said. "Come here." He came. We stood side by side at the window, looking down at the rows of winter herbs, rosemary, thyme. Something dark green and orderly I couldn't name from this distance. His breathing was uneven, and he was working hard to control it. "I saw your face," I said, when Richard was speaking. "Don't," he said, his voice tight and raw. "I'm not going to tell you what it meant," I said. "You already know." He pressed the heel of his hand hard against his forehead, the gesture of a man trying to push something back into place that has come loose. "I spent 15 years building something," he said, his voice cracking at the seams. 80-hour weeks, lying, telling myself it was worth it, because one day I'd be in a room where no one could look down at me, where no one would see the truck, the thrift store suit, the loading dock. His hand dropped. I finally got there. And then you walked through the gate this morning, and in 4 hours you did more in that room than I managed in 15 years, without trying, without wanting anything, just by being who you are. My chest ached with something I had no clean vocabulary for: grief and love, and something almost like pride, though not in myself. "Did you love her?" I asked. "Victoria, does any part of what you feel for her have nothing to do with her father's money?" He turned back to this window. His jaw worked. His hands opened and closed once at his sides. "Yes," he said finally. In the beginning it was strategy, I won't pretend otherwise. But somewhere in the last year it stopped being strategy and became something I don't have a clean word for. That's what it feels like, I said quietly. Messy and without a clean word. He made a sound short and broken that might have been a laugh in different circumstances. I put my hand on his shoulder. He went rigid, not pulling away, just unprepared for warmth after a long, cold stretch. I'm going to speak to Richard, I said. Dad. Not to make things worse for you, I said. To do what a father does. I found Richard near the platform. He read my face immediately and excused himself from the surrounding guests with practiced ease. We stepped to the terrace railing. The bay stretched below us, gray-blue, vast, indifferent, and beautiful. My son made choices that were wrong, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. He made them deliberately and over a long time, and he knew exactly what he was doing. I cannot defend those choices. I held his gaze. But I am his father. And a father answers for his children, not to shift the blame, but to say I was there. Whatever he became happened on my watch. I am sorry, Richard. Truly sorry for what he did to your company and your family. Richard studied me for a long moment. His expression deepened, something surface level resolving into something with more dimension. In 50 years of business, he said slowly, exactly 3 people have apologized to me and meant it. A pause. You are the 4th. He was running from you. Richard continued, looking at the bay. Which is the saddest kind of running there is, because you are clearly not something worth running from. Something cracked open in my chest, wide and sudden, and I pressed my knuckles hard against my mouth until the wave passed. My shoulders shook once. Then I pulled myself back together. When I turned around, Ethan was standing in the terrace doorway. He had followed me. He had watched the whole thing. His face was the face of a man feeling something faster than he could protect himself from it. Victoria appeared beside him. She looked at his face. Then she reached over and took his hand. He did not pull away. Richard saw it. He looked at me, something in his expression that was quieter and more durable than a smile. I think, he said, we have a wedding to decide about. Richard's words stayed with me as I found the garden path behind the main building. The kitchen garden was larger than it looked from above. Long rows of rosemary and winter sage raised beds, still holding dark, leafy greens against the November chill, and a stone bench at the far end facing the bay. The water was gray-silver. A pelican drifted above the shoreline, barely moving its wings. I sat. My legs needed it. 69 years old, and this had been the longest day I could remember, longer than the 36-hour Chicago run in the ice storm of 2017, longer than the night I drove home alone at 4 a.m. after leaving Margaret at the hospital for the last time. I pressed both palms flat on the cold stone and breathed. Behind me, through the glass walls of the estate, the reception hummed on music voices, life continuing, the way it always does while real things are being decided in gardens and corridors. Then footsteps. 2 sets. Victoria's voice steady and direct. Ethan. Not a question. A direction. I know. His voice rough at the edges. My father is giving you a choice, she said. Sign a full disclosure agreement. Surrender any financial claim connected to this marriage, and walk away, no legal action, clean separation. Or face everything, the fraud, the document manipulation, Marcus, and accept whatever consequences my father's attorneys determine. A beat. But first, your father is in that garden. Go talk to him. Not to apologize, you don't get credit for that yet. Just talk. Then come back and tell me what you're choosing. Ethan's footsteps moved toward me. He came around the rosemary row and stopped when he saw me. His jacket was over his arm, the expensive black wool hanging loose, and without it, he looked younger, less armored, more like someone's son. He sat beside me, close enough to share the bench, not close enough to touch. A breeze came off the bay, cool and salt-edged, moving through the rosemary, and releasing the smell of it sharp and clean, the kind of smell that carries entire years inside it. I remember the truck, Ethan said quietly. The diesel smell, that terrible pine air freshener off the mirror. Something turned over in my chest. Your mother gave me that first Christmas after we married, I said. I kept replacing it every time it wore out. Wow. I used to hate that smell. His voice frayed at the edges. I'd give a lot to smell it right now. My throat tightened. I looked at the water. I don't know how to fix this, he said. Any of it. You start with today, I said. One decision that isn't about what benefits you. Then tomorrow, another one. He turned to me, eyes red and raw and completely without strategy. Are you still my father? The question reached somewhere so deep I needed a full breath before answering. Ethan, I have been your father since before you could hold your own head up. That has never once been conditional. He broke quietly, the way men break when they have held something too long. I put my arm around him the way I had not done since he was 12, sitting on his bedroom floor after his mother's funeral. He did not pull away. When his breathing steadied, he looked out at the bay. I'm going to stay, he said, and face it. All right, I said. One word. That was all it needed. Richard called me back to his office at 4 o'clock. The afternoon had gone golden by then, that particular Texas November light that comes in low and amber and makes everything look like it has been preserved in something warm. Through the office window, the kitchen garden threw long shadows across the lawn. Richard had a legal pad on the desk, handwritten notes in the margins. The sealed envelope now opened its contents, photographed and cataloged by his legal team, sat in a clear document sleeve beside it. Sit down, Harold, he said. I sat. Ethan has agreed to full disclosure, Richard said. My attorneys will spend the next several months working through the fraud interference claim and the document manipulation involving your signature. He will cooperate fully. He looked at his notes. In the interim, before any formal legal resolution, I am requiring him to work at the Hayes Energy Distribution Center on the north side of Houston. Ground-level operations, receiving inventory logistics coordination. He looked up. It happens to be the facility your route serviced for 6 years. I held his gaze. You want him to see it, I said. What the work actually looks like. I want him to feel it, Richard said. In his hands, every morning. I nodded slowly. It was a harder sentence than firing him. It was the right one. Richard pushed a single sheet of paper across the desk toward me. I looked at it, a consulting agreement, my name printed at the top, a compensation figure in the middle that made my eyes go briefly unfocused. I want you as an independent advisor to our logistics division, Richard said. Not because you know the oil business, because you know how goods move, how people move, and how to tell when something is being done wrong. He folded his hands. And because I trust your judgment in a way I do not trust many people's. I looked at the paper for a long moment. Then I pushed it back gently. I'll think about it, I said. Richard laughed. A full, real, delighted laugh that filled the office. That is exactly what I expected you to say. He stood and shook my hand, both of his, around one of mine, the same as the first time. And I understood now that this was simply how he shook hands with people who mattered to him. I walked back to my truck as the sun was dropping toward the horizon. The canvas bag was lighter without the wooden box. I had left it with Richard, who wanted to keep it. I understood that too. The faded red truck sat where I had left it that morning, patient and unchanged, looking exactly wrong among the Cadillacs and Range Rovers. I climbed in. I picked up Margaret's thermos from the cup holder, empty, now long cold, and held it in both hands for a moment. Well, Margaret, I said quietly. It was quite a day. I set the thermos down, started the engine, and pulled out onto the road. The highway opened up ahead of me, long and flat and honest, the way Texas roads always are, stretching west into a sky that had gone the color of copper and rose. I rolled the window down. The evening air came in cool and smelling of salt and distance, and the particular freedom of a road that goes wherever you point it. I did not know what December would bring. I did not know what Ethan would choose when the 6 months were up, or whether Victoria's patience would outlast his learning curve, or whether I would sign Richard's paper, or keep driving my roots the way I had for 41 years. What I knew was this: I had driven 600 miles that morning to see my son get married. I had been told I was an embarrassment. I had been handed an envelope of cash and told to disappear. And somehow, by the time the sun went down, I was the one driving home with something I had not had when I left. Not money, not a title, not recognition, just the particular peace of a man who did the right thing on a long day when it would have been much easier not to. Margaret always said that was the only kind of peace worth having. She was right about most things. I have told you the whole of it now, every mile of that road. If I were a wiser man, I might have seen it coming, the distance that grows when you let silence do the work that honesty should do. I waited too long to show up. I told myself I was being respectful of his space, his life, his choices. But the truth is simpler and harder than that. I was afraid of being turned away. And by waiting, I nearly lost the chance entirely. So here is what I want to say to you, from one ordinary person to another. Don't do what I did. Don't let the years of quiet pile up until they become a wall. Don't wait for a crisis to say the things that should be said on a Tuesday over the phone. The people you love need to hear it before life forces the conversation. I believe God puts certain moments in front of us, not because we deserve them, but because we need them. That morning at the gate was one of mine. Painful as it was, I would not trade it. It cracked something open that needed to be cracked. I am 69 years old. I have driven enough roads to know that the longest distance between two people is never the miles. It is the words left unspoken and the pride that keeps them that way. These are the family stories that don't make the news, but shape everything. The grandpa stories nobody films, but everybody carries. The quiet family stories of ordinary men doing the only thing they know, showing up. The grandpa stories told at kitchen tables, in truck cabs, on garden benches. The grandpa stories that outlast everything else. If this story reached something in you, leave a word in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you'd like to walk more roads like this, subscribe and stay with us. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. And a final word: some stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and meaning. If that's not the journey you're looking for, no hard feelings at all. Step away and find what speaks to you best. But if you're staying, we promise to make it worth your time.